You clicked because you saw those words about cooks who never needed a single store-bought shortcut. Good. Sit with me a minute. I want to show you something my grandmother did with an empty pantry that would embarrass half the products in your kitchen right now. Here is the truth most people never hear. During the worst years of the Great Depression, families fed themselves without bouillon cubes, without boxed mixes, without canned soup, without a single thing wrapped in plastic. They made those shortcuts themselves, from nothing, and the homemade versions were better, cheaper, cleaner. That knowledge existed in every kitchen in America. Then it vanished. It vanished because someone found a way to sell it back to us. I am going to hand you 20 of those food hacks before this video ends. And I am going to save the strangest one for last. A trick I found written in a 1933 home economics bulletin out of a state agricultural college, a method that turns 2 cents of ingredients into something you buy in a jar today. Every one of these works on a fixed income this week with what you already own. You do not need land. You do not need savings. You need a memory that somebody almost let die. I can still see my grandmother's hands at her kitchen table in the winter, a chipped white bowl in front of her, scraping the last gray flour from the bottom of a cloth sack while snow ticked against the window. She never wasted the sack either. I dismissed all of it for 40 years. I thought I was smarter with my coupons and my convenience. I was wrong, and the price of being wrong is exactly what I want to talk about. Let me start where she started. Flour. You think a bag of flour is just a bag of flour. My grandmother saw a dozen products inside it. The first thing she taught me, and the first thing most families knew back then, was how to make your own thickener for gravy, soup, and stew without ever buying a can of cream soup or a jar of anything. You take flour and you toast it, dry, in a hot skillet, no oil, moving it constantly until it turns the color of light coffee. That is it. That browned flour stores in a jar for months, and when you stir a spoonful into hot fat and milk, you get a rich brown gravy in 90 seconds. During the 1930s, this was called browned flour, and it was in nearly every rural kitchen because it stretched a tiny bit of meat drippings into a meal that coated a whole pan of potatoes. Here is what nobody tells you. That same trick is the base of every expensive gravy packet on the shelf today. You are paying $1.50 for browned flour and salt. My grandmother made a year's worth for the cost of the flour and the 15 minutes at the stove. But flour did more than thicken. She made her own baking powder biscuits rise without a store can, and that leads me to the thing that shocked me most when I finally listened. She kept sour milk on purpose. On purpose. Milk that turned in the icebox was not garbage to her. It was an ingredient. Soured milk, the real kind, from raw or non-treated milk, reacts with baking soda and makes the lightest biscuits and pancakes you will ever eat. When you had no money for baking powder, you had chemistry instead. A quarter teaspoon of baking soda and a cup of clabbered milk did the same job for almost nothing. Families in 1932 were not throwing food out. They were letting it change into something more useful. Now think about what that means for you today. Every time a carton smells a little off and you pour it down the drain, you are throwing away a biscuit. You are throwing away a pancake. You were taught to fear that milk. My grandmother was taught to use it. Somebody profited from the difference, and I will get to exactly who, because it made me angrier the more I learned. Bread was the center of everything, and here is where the real waste began. A hardened loaf. You have thrown one away. I have thrown away dozens before I knew better. To a Depression family, stale bread was not the end of bread. It was the beginning of 4 other meals. Stale bread became breadcrumbs, dried on the back of the stove and crushed in a cloth, and those crumbs breaded meat and topped casseroles all winter. Stale bread became bread pudding, the dessert that fed a family of 6 on a few eggs and a little sugar. Stale bread became the filler that stretched 1 pound of ground meat into a meatloaf that fed everyone twice. And the driest, hardest heels became the thickening for soup, soaked and mashed, adding body without a drop of cream. One loaf, worked correctly, never went to waste in any form. I need you to feel the size of what we lost here. The average American household today throws away a frightening amount of the bread it buys. Government food waste studies have put household bread and grain waste in the range of a third of what gets purchased. A third. My grandmother's entire cooking philosophy was built to make that number zero. She would have called throwing away bread a kind of sin, and she lived it, not preached it. So why did we forget? Why did knowledge this simple, this useful, this proven, disappear in a single generation? Here is where I have to tell you the part that took me years to see. Nobody sat America down and ordered us to forget. It was quieter than that, and cleverer. Somewhere after the war, in the late 1940s and through the 1950s, a new idea got sold to the American kitchen. The idea was that your time was too valuable to make things from scratch, that a modern woman deserved convenience, that scratch cooking was drudgery, your mother suffered, and you had earned the right to escape. It sounded like progress. It sounded like freedom. And every bit of it moved a skill out of your hands and into a factory that would now charge you rent on something you used to do for free. Think about the browned flour. When you knew how to make gravy from drippings and toasted flour, the food company had nothing to sell you, so they put the exact same thing in a foil packet, printed the word instant on it, and charged you 30 times the cost of the flour inside. They did not invent anything. They fenced off something you already owned and started collecting a toll. The clabbered milk, the sour milk biscuits, that knowledge threatened the baking powder tin and later the boxed mix. So the message became simple and constant. Sour milk is spoiled. Spoiled means dangerous. Throw it out and buy fresh. And while you are at it, buy the mix so you never have to think about chemistry again. Fear did the selling. A frightened cook buys more and wastes more, and both of those made somebody money. I am not telling you a conspiracy with a single villain in a dark room. I am telling you something more ordinary and more permanent. An entire economy discovered that forgetting is profitable. Every skill you lose becomes a product you must buy. And the most valuable thing they ever got us to forget was that our great-grandparents fed families through the worst decade in American history using none of it. The Federal Writers Project, back in the late 1930s, sent people out to record how ordinary Americans were surviving. Those oral histories still exist in the archives. Read them, and you will not find helplessness. You will find women who could make a full week of dinners out of a sack of cornmeal, a little fat, and whatever the garden gave up. That competence was normal. It was expected. And it was slowly, deliberately replaced with dependence dressed up as convenience. Once I understood that, I could not unsee it. Every aisle in the grocery store started looking like a museum of things my grandmother did for free. So let me keep handing them back to you, because there are more, and they get better. Take eggs, or rather, take the times you had no eggs. A Depression cook did not stop baking because the hens quit in cold weather. She knew that a tablespoon of vinegar and a teaspoon of baking soda would lift a cake when eggs were scarce. She knew that a little water and oil and baking powder could bind a batter. This is where the famous cakes with no eggs, no milk, and no butter came from, the ones people called crazy cake or war cake. They were not a novelty. They were survival, and they are so reliable that people still make them today without knowing they are eating history. Take coffee, which was precious and expensive. Families stretched it by mixing ground coffee with roasted grain, chicory root, even toasted barley. A little real coffee flavored a whole pot when you extended it. And the used grounds went to the garden, into the soil around acid-loving plants, so even the waste worked a second job. Take bones, which is where I want to slow down, because this one matters most for your body and your wallet at the same time. Nothing with a bone in it was ever thrown out whole. Chicken carcasses, ham bones, beef bones, they all went into a pot of water with a splash of vinegar and simmered for hours. That vinegar was not for taste. My grandmother could not have told you the science, but she knew from her own mother that a little vinegar in the pot pulled the goodness out of the bones. Modern nutrition Yenjo backs her up. A small amount of acid helps draw minerals out of bone into the broth. She was doing food chemistry at the stove and calling it plain cooking. That broth was the foundation of everything. It was the bouillon cube before there was a bouillon cube. It was the canned stock before there was a can. And here is the part that should stop you cold. You are buying, right now, in a box or a jar or a little foil cube, the exact thing your kitchen throws in the trash every single week. The bones from tonight's chicken are worth more than the carton of broth you will buy on Friday. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, and this next part is for you specifically. You are on a fixed income. You do not have a garden. You do not have a chest freezer or a pantry full of jars or a whole free afternoon. You are wondering if any of this actually helps someone whose money is already gone by the middle of the month. I put this next part here for you because everything I just described was invented by people who had less than you have right now. Here is what you can do this week with nothing you do not already have. Start a bone bag in your freezer. Every time you eat anything with a bone, every chicken thigh, every pork chop, every time you buy a rotisserie chicken, you strip it clean and you throw the bones in a bag in the freezer. Onion skins, celery ends, the tops of carrots, the papery bits of garlic, they go in the same bag. You spend nothing. You buy nothing. You are simply keeping what you already paid for instead of paying the trash company to haul it away. If you want to go deeper into exactly how this shift happened and, more importantly, how to reverse it in your own kitchen and household, I have written all of it out in full in my books, Depression Proof, Deep Frugal, and The Full System, which you can find linked in the description below. They walk through the complete picture, the history, the forgotten methods, and a practical system for running a kitchen the way our great-grandparents did on almost nothing, and eating well because of it. If today's video is landing with you, those books will take you the rest of the way. When that bag is full, you dump it in a pot, cover it with water, add a spoonful of any vinegar you own, and let it sit on the lowest heat for a few hours while you go about your day. Strain it. You now have several quarts of rich broth that would have cost you real money at the store. Freeze it in cups, that is soup, gravy, the liquid to cook your rice and beans in so they actually taste like something. One bag of garbage becomes a week of flavor, and it costs you the price of turning on a burner. And beans. Let me give the fixed income cook the whole picture, because dry beans are the single most powerful food a tight budget owns, and the Depression proved it. A bag of dry beans costs a fraction of canned, and one bag makes many meals. My grandmother soaked them overnight in salted water, which does two things people argue about today, but she knew cold. The salt in the soak seasons the bean all the way through, and the long soak softens them so they cook faster and cost less fuel. She added a pinch of baking soda to the soak water when the beans were old and stubborn, because a tiny bit of soda softens the skins and cuts the cooking time nearly in half. That saved gas. That saved money. That is chemistry a poor woman used every single week. Cook those beans in the broth from your bone bag, and you have joined two nearly free things into a meal with protein, minerals, and real flavor, made from what most households throw away. There is no product on any shelf that beats it for the money, none. And you did it with a pot, a burner, and knowledge that was almost lost. While the beans cook, let me give you the cornmeal trick, because it is the other pillar of eating cheap and eating full, cornmeal mush. You stir cornmeal into simmering salted water until it thickens, and you eat it hot like porridge that night, cheap and filling. But here is the old part. Whatever you do not eat, you pour into a loaf pan and let it set up cold overnight. In the morning it has firmed into a solid block. You slice that block, fry the slices in a little fat until they are crisp and golden, and you have fried mush, a breakfast that fed millions through the 1930s. One pot of cornmeal at night becomes a second meal in the morning with no new ingredients. That is 2 meals from pennies, and it is the kind of thing that kept children fed when there was nothing else. Do you see the pattern now? Every one of these is the same idea, wearing different clothes. Nothing is waste. Everything has a second life. The peel, the bone, the sour milk, the stale heel, the cooking water. A depression kitchen ran in a circle where the store-bought kitchen runs in a straight line from purchase to garbage. That circle is the whole secret, and it was taken from us one convenient product at a time. Let me give you a few more before the last one, quick, the way my grandmother rattled them off when she caught me about to throw something out. Potato water. When you boil potatoes, you keep that starchy water and you use it as the liquid in your bread. It makes the loaf softer and it feeds the yeast, and bakers in hard times swore by it. Free ingredient, better bread, bacon grease. It lived in a can by the stove and it never, ever got thrown out. It fried the eggs, it seasoned the beans, it started the gravy, it greased the pan for cornbread. 1 pound of bacon flavored a month of meals through its own saved fat. Today people pour that liquid gold down the drain and then buy oil. My grandmother would have taken your hand off the trash can. Citrus peels and apple peels. The peels most people compost or toss were simmered with a little sugar and water into syrups, or dried and ground for baking. Nothing left the kitchen with value still in it. Wilted vegetables. A limp carrot, a soft celery stalk, greens gone floppy in the drawer. None of it was garbage. A short soak in cold water crisps most vegetables right back to life, and whatever will not crisp goes into the broth pot. You have been throwing away food that is 1 bowl of water away from fine. The cooking water from your vegetables. That green or golden water full of the minerals that leached out of the food. It went into the soup, always. You paid for those vitamins. My grandmother refused to pour them down the sink, and now I refuse too. Every single one of these I dismissed at some point in my life as fussy, old-fashioned, not worth the bother. I had a good income once, and I thought that made the knowledge obsolete. Then prices climbed, and my savings thinned, and I watched younger people around me paying premium money for the exact thing sitting in my own trash. And it hit me that my grandmother, with almost nothing, ate better and wasted less than I did with a full wallet. She was not poor in the way that mattered. She was rich in knowledge, and I had let mine rot. Which brings me to the one I promised you. The strangest one. The one I want you to try this weekend. I found it while I was going through old home economics and agricultural extension bulletins from the early 1930s, the kind of thin government-printed pamphlets that were mailed to farm wives and city relief kitchens alike. In one of them, dated 1933, there was a method for making your own condiment and seasoning base, and when I read it, I actually laughed out loud, because it is the ancestor of a product people spend real money on today, and it costs almost nothing to make. They called it a homemade seasoning or savory paste, and the idea was to capture flavor and keep it without refrigeration, which every family needed when iceboxes were small and electricity was a luxury. You take an onion, and you cook it slow in a little fat until it goes deep brown, almost jammy, sweet and dark. You add salt, which is the preservative. You add whatever dried herbs or celery leaves you saved and dried yourself, and you cook it down into a thick, dark paste. That paste, sealed in a small jar with a film of fat on top, kept for weeks and delivered a punch of savory, meaty depth to any pot of water it touched. Do you understand what that is? That is bouillon. That is the flavor base in the little jar. That is the umami paste sold today in fancy tubes at fancy prices with fancy words on the label. A woman in 1933, feeding her family on relief, was making it from a single onion, a spoon of fat, and salt, and she was making it better because there was nothing artificial in it. She did not know the science word for what made it taste so deep. She just knew that a browned onion cooked down to almost nothing carried the flavor of meat when there was no meat to be had. Here is exactly how you do it this weekend, and I want you to actually do it, because reading it is not the same as tasting it. Take 1 large onion, or 2, and slice them thin. Mmm. Put them in a pan with a spoonful of any fat you have. Bacon grease is best. Butter or oil is fine. Cook them low and slow, and I mean slow, 25 or 30 minutes, stirring now and then, until they collapse into a dark brown sweet mass. Do not rush it and do not burn it. When they are deep and jammy, add a good pinch of salt and any dried herbs you like, and cook it down another few minutes until it is a thick paste. Scrape it into a small, clean jar. Keep it in the refrigerator now, since you have one, and it will last for weeks. Then, any night you are tired and broke and staring at a pot of plain rice or plain beans or plain noodles, you stir in a spoonful of that paste. Suddenly the whole pot tastes like it simmered all day. That is the trick the little store jars are selling you. You just made it for the cost of an onion, exactly the way a depression cook did when the little jars did not exist and there was no money for them anyway. That is the finale, and it is small on purpose, because that is the whole lesson. The things that were taken from us were never big and complicated. They were small, humble, and so easy that once you know them, you feel a little robbed that nobody told you sooner. A browned onion, a bag of bones, a carton of sour milk, a stale loaf, each one a tiny piece of freedom that got quietly repackaged and sold back to us with a brand name on it. My grandmother is gone now. Her chipped white bowl, the one she scraped the last flour from, sits in my own kitchen. For most of my life I kept it as decoration, a sweet old thing from a hard time I was glad I never had to live through. Now I use it, the way she did, and every time my hands are in it, I understand that she was not surviving in spite of what she knew. She was surviving because of it. The knowledge was the thing that carried them, and it very nearly died with her generation, packed away in silence while the rest of us learned to buy what we used to make. That is what you recovered today. Not tricks. Not hacks, really, though that is what the title calls them. You recovered a way of seeing your own kitchen, where nothing is waste and almost nothing needs to be bought, the exact way people saw it when they had no other choice and discovered it was a better way to live. You are the kind of person who suspects, deep down, that a lot of what we were sold as progress was really just a bill for something we already had. If that is you, you belong here, with the rest of us who are digging this knowledge back up before it is gone for good. So tell me something in the comments, and be specific, because I read them. Which one are you going to try first? The bone bag in the freezer, or that browned onion paste from the 1933 bulletin? And tell me this too. What did your own family save, reuse, or refuse to throw away? Some little habit from a grandmother or a grandfather that you have never seen anyone else do. Somebody reading this needs that exact memory, so leave it below. And tell me where you are watching from, because I love knowing how far this old knowledge still travels. If any of this reached you, subscribe and stand with the people who are recovering what our grandparents were forced to learn, before the last ones who remember it are gone. Next time I am going to show you the way they kept butter, eggs, and meat from spoiling for weeks with no refrigeration at all, using nothing but a cellar, a crock, and one ingredient sitting in your cabinet right now. That method fed families through summers with no electricity, and almost nobody alive remembers how it was done. I will see you there. Before you go, let me tell you where this really opens up. Inside the hard time circle, I pick up right where this video left off. And in there you can ask me your own kitchen question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone, folks just like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime.